Attention retirees, if you're willing to be at your computer from 9 a.m. to 10:45 a.m.
Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a fun day. We had a fun little John Cage moment there where you got to listen to me eating some Pacific Gold beef jerky, perhaps opening a soda, and you could think to yourself, I wonder what music is. Is music the sound of sodas being opened? That's the whole thing about like postmodern stuff from like the 1950s, about questioning what people were art, about people questioning what art was. Was art? Could art be the sound of people shuffling their programs as the pianist sits with the keyboard open? Is that art? Could it be the sound of John Cage chewing and eating crackers? Could that be art? Could that be art? I'm going to have this come out at some point. Postmodern's old hat. People don't realize how old postmodern art is, and how old the postmodern art movement is, and how it has anything that you see that is being pushed as somehow new or interesting was probably done 70 years ago. All right. Postmodern art is older than the baby boomers at this point. So when people talk about the banana taped to the wall, it's like people were doing that stuff in the 1940s. Okay. The modern was like 1910. Postmodern's like 1950. 1954. It's been 70 years since John Cage did the piece of music that doesn't exist, 4 minutes and 33 seconds or whatever, where you open up the piano and there's no music. Very clever. Like whoever does it whoever's the first mover can be really clever. And that was John Cage, for sure. He did lots of really clever, silly things. Put staff paper behind a an aquarium, and wherever the fish went, those are the notes you played, like aleatoric weird stuff. He did pieces of music that were people moving around and saying different words, like that would be the music. His stuff's very old hat at this point, though. We're just kind of repeating the same garbage, and we've been doing it for 70 years. And because of the internet, and because normies have a short attention span, and because they don't really enjoy or take in modern art, there's not a lot to take in at a modern art gallery, they just kind of forget that this stuff's really old. Someone's like, I'm selling a painting that doesn't exist. It's like, you're 70 years too late for this. People did this 70 years ago. It's just very old and boring and stupid and lame at this point. It's insulting only because it's not remotely original. It doesn't do what it says it's going to do. That was an old thing. That was 70 years ago, guys. We're going to get to 100 years of postmodern music, and people will be like, I can't believe somebody sold a rotten banana in a toilet and named it the Virgin Mary. It's like, people did that in 1990. People did that in 1970. People did that in 1950. The problem with postmodern art is there's nowhere else to go, right? Once you do the music that doesn't exist, once you do music that's just silence, there's nowhere else to go. You have to go do something else. And so that's why around the same time as postmodern stuff was coming out, or a little bit later, you had things like minimalism, an actual style which developed primarily in academia. Remember, we talked about that division between the popular and the academic. It's primarily an academic style. And that it had real things that were going for it. It had actual means by which it achieved its aesthetic. It had an actual aesthetic. Guys like Steve Reich and Terry Riley and Philip Glass had an aesthetic they were pursuing with minimalism, and they had techniques which resulted in that aesthetic. So it wasn't random. There may have been chance involved in a lot of it, but it wasn't like, fish behind a fish in front of a music staff and stuff like that. But we didn't really go too far with minimalism. Minimalism went into what we would think of popular stuff, ambient music. I do minimalism on my channel, right? I haven't posted anything on the music channel recently. I'll address that in a minute. It's nothing bad. It's just having to focus more intensely on certain other projects that I have to get done before I can move on to other ones. So, I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I mean, my music does minimalism. This is minimalism in the background here. It uses that. There's jazz in the background. So it finds its way into like the electronic music scene. So the approaches to minimalism end up being used by like even dance music and things like that. Which academics don't know what to do with that, right? Like doing, John Channing might have been very influential on the beat music, which became what we think of today as electronic music. But you can't really do what became electronic music in academia because that's popular. You just can't do popular music. You have to do unpopular things or it's not art. And that's the attitude that exists in most universities. That's the academic attitude, is that if it's popular, it can't be art. And if it's art, it has to be unpopular. Like, these things can't exist. It can't be serious and have people enjoy it, right? The only exception that I find is people who are into cinema kind of recognize that big movies are still art as they study them, though they still may have like a hoity-toity attitude about a lot of movies, that like Marvel is fast food garbage cinema, and they're right. But because cinema is so popular, it's harder to ignore it. Whereas if you're gonna go be a guitar performance major, you're probably gonna spend all your time playing classical guitar music that no one likes and no one listens to, and barely anybody's interested in. They're only really interested in it as background music and only certain things. And I know that as a person who made his living playing classical guitar. You can do it, and it's possible. It gets very boring after a while. But people are not really into classical guitar. They like the idea of it. It sounds nice at a restaurant. It sounds nice for certain occasions, but it's not a thing that people are super into. Same thing with a lot of stuff like that. Classical flute. If you study classical flute, you're never going to be doing anything that's really popular. It's just not. Right? It's just not going to happen. Listening to Jethro Tull is not acceptable. So this thing that postmodern art is a Cold War CIA era psyop, this is untrue. Not only is this untrue, it's like it's first of all, it's false. It goes way back before the existence of the CIA, so it's not a CIA psyop. It's a trend that exists in academia, which exists more or less because of the things that are going around in academia. So the people who are like, this is a CIA psyop, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. I'm just going to tell you that right now. All of the threads of modern and postmodern art exist way before the CIA. So that right there, the CIA can't create a psyop out of something that existed before it. If you've ever been in academia, there's not a government agent coming around and enforcing that everybody does postmodern art. It's a way for low effort people to maintain like their separation from the popular. And even then, in academia, it's incredibly diverse what's going on. It's not just postmodern art. Postmodern art is what we end up seeing on the internet as an example of stuff. If you listen to wind ensemble music, there's nothing postmodern about wind ensemble music. Go listen to like North Texas, wind ensemble or whatever, and there's nothing postmodern about that. But that's academic art that's coming out of the academic era or the academic realm. Same thing with literature. Right. Joyce Carol Oates is not really a postmodern writer. She was like the author in residence when I was a graduate student at my university. But she doesn't really have much in common with like the bizarro fiction that would come to be thought of as postmodern. It's just kind of contemporary fiction, and that's what they use. They use the word contemporary, which doesn't really mean anything. It just means like the stuff that is now, and then they would want it to be art. Like it's a literature. Like this idea of literature has no defined style. It's not postmodern. But postmodern stuff really wasn't a psyop. It was very short-lived. I've heard this too. Modern art's a means for the wealthy to launder their money. The way that this would work would be you commission someone to make a painting, and then you have the painting appraised, and then you donate it for a tax write-off for the appraisal value. But people will artificially inflate the cost of lots of collectibles through a very shady means of basically manipulating auctions. And if you don't know about this, it kind of spilled over a little bit more into people's like mainstream view with a channel called Carl Jobst. I think he's Australian. Talking about how video game auctions were being manipulated. Basically what you do, and this was a thing that people did with comic books for years. Basically what you do is let's say you have a comic that you want to sell and you want to make a lot of money on it. What you'll do is you'll put that comic up for auction, and then you'll have a friend buy that auction because the auctions are secret. So you have a person anonymously buy the auction, and then you just take your book and you put it back in your vault. You pay him for that, and then you do that several times, and each time you do it the value goes up, and then finally you sell it for an increased value, and the profit you've made is everything over what you have spent auctioning this item. So if I bought like an Amazing Fantasy 15, whatever one that Spider-Man showed up in, and I bought it for $100,000, put it up for auction for $150, buy it for myself, put it up for $250, buy it, and then I put it up for $1 million, and somebody else buys it. We've just convinced that third person that it's worth $1 million by buying and selling stuff to ourselves. Okay, so the problem is, how do you prove that? The only way that you prove it is people have come out and said, this is what my dad did. This is what this person did. I watched him do it. Because it's all anonymous. So then there's even securitizing art, securitizing modern art or any other kind of art, where people buy stock basically in art. They buy a security that buys art assets and then looks to sell them for a profit. The problem with that is that in order to make the money, you have to sell the art. And who's buying the art? It's only other securities. So eventually the tulip market collapses and you realize that there's no value to art, or the art is at such a lower value that no one would buy it. But because it's of a limited quantity, it's not like tulips where you can end up with a glut of it very easily. Yeah, there's a million Picassos out there. Not a million, but there's a lot of Picassos out there. How much is a Picasso worth? It's hard to say. It's worth as much as people are willing to pay for it, but who are the people paying for it? It may be people buying and selling it to themselves. It may be a security of people that are only buying and selling it to improve the value of their own portfolio of things that they're not selling. And then maybe they use that to create trading value for their security, and people buy the security and then use that security to leverage debt on something else. Like, I own this much assets and then I can get a line of credit. It's all like House of Cards, you know? It's like duct tape a banana to a wall. What do you think about the Nintendo Power lawsuit? Nintendo's in the wrong 100%, but you know, it's not up to me. Do you think companies should be able to patent gameplay mechanics? Short answer is no. Because what is a gameplay mechanic? Right? What is Mario jumping? It's a sprite moving across a screen. Can you patent a sprite moving across a screen? Obviously not. There'd be no video games. Can you patent, quote, catching creatures? Like, if I have a butterfly collecting game, is that going to infringe on Pokemon? I don't think so. You know, they're too loose. It's too hard to nail down exactly what a gameplay mechanic is, and whether that's a piece of an original property. It's not subject to copyright. Like, you know, the Dungeons and Dragons rulebook is subject to copyright. The words there are copyrighted, but the mechanic is not an invention, right? It doesn't like fall neatly into categories of things that we would patent, right? Like, you patent how a remote control works, something in some kind of circuit that's new. You can patent that because it's a thing that does something. Whereas gameplay mechanic is just, what is it? You own the code, but if I replicate the movement of something on screen, I haven't copied the code, right? I haven't stolen anything. I haven't plagiarized anything. So, I don't know. Yeah, the Fed gets a lot more credit than it deserves. I mean, the Federal Reserve gets more credit than it deserves, too. Didn't CIA pump money in the scene, though? Not that I'm aware of, no. I mean, maybe. There's this narrative, and there's certain people on Twitter that have put it out, and they have no effing clue what they're talking about. That the CIA conjured this up to, like, counter communist art, which was better somehow, and that's just not true at all. First of all, it had no effect. Like, postmodern art has had no effect on the world, right? Popular art is what matters. Now, has the government had its little fingers in popular art? There's some cases where I think that might be the case. You can get into some conspiracy theory stuff with that, but if you're going to be, you know, what really had an effect on the communists was not postmodern art. It was popular music. The government directly funds postmodern art, though. Indirectly funds postmodern art in ways that people don't quite realize. Right? They fund it through the National Endowment for the Arts, which is a direct fund. Right? They buy things like Piss Christ. They buy bad art. It's a patronage thing that you use the government to patronize people. But they indirectly fund it through the university system, and the university system still gets a ton of government money. Even if they're a private institution, they get grants, they get all kinds of things that go through the government. So the system as a whole is funded by the government, and therefore is going to be subject to what the government wants from that. If you get a grant to do some sort of ethnomusicology project, it's going to be woke, guys. It's going to be woke. That's just how it is, right? So is it a CIA thing? Not really. It's not really a CIA thing. So the idea that the CIA just like created postmodern music out of nothing, I don't know. If you go back and study the actual history of it, not really. There was actually patronage that happened, believe it or not, during that time. I'd say the main way that it was supported is most of these people were at universities, which means that they had a job teaching that kind of stuff at a university. They were on the government dole. So it's mostly the university system that created postmodern art and sustains it still. It's not really government intervention. But if you're not in academia, that stuff's going to be rather opaque, like how that's going to work. It's not going to make a lot of sense unless you've been in the arts, in the university level. Florida, yeah. There's a hurricane might be coming to Louisiana. I should actually check it. We were worried about it coming to Houston. We already had one. We already had a hurricane. Category 1 Helene. It looks like it's headed towards the Florida Panhandle and up through Georgia. And Hurricane John is down in Acapulco, I think. Or now it's a tropical storm. It's in the Pacific, technically. All right. Imagine trying to copyright the idea of a scoreboard in an arcade game. Well, you could copyright the code. Can you patent the idea of scores being tallied based on you doing things in a game? No, because that goes back to like ancient Egypt, right? So there's nothing to patent there. It's not new. It's like you're keeping records of it. Yeah, but putting numbers on the scoreboard in a baseball game, we're just putting that on the screen. Can't really patent that. Can you patent catching critters? Maybe. I don't know. I think it's a pretty big stretch. I was always told by my friends I was paranoid texting about weed and stuff, but then I did end up getting a federal indictment. Whoa. Can't hurt to be careful on text. What do you think of Edward Hopper's paintings? Let me take a look. I don't know who that is, so... I don't know who that is. Edward Hopper. Oh, he did this one. These kind of realist paintings. I think they have a cool flavor. Let's take a look at some of these, huh? I think these are cool. Yes. Now that I look them up. So I was thinking of yeah, these sort of look at the modern life ones here. Nighthawks. This one's the really famous one. Right. It looks cool. Let's can we look at the painting? Here it is. Okay. Yeah, so what are we looking at here? Somebody's calling this like realist. There's not really a new aesthetic to this, so it doesn't fall into what I think of as modern. Modern is really about finding new aesthetics. So there's several different aesthetic systems in modern art, you know, like Cubism might be one, or Surrealism. So this is maybe modern realist. It's a little bit different aesthetic than the 19th century, but we still have a authentic representation of the human form. So we're not pushing towards the postmodern, really, right? This looks like a stripped down. It's more like stripped down illustration from the 19th century. Notice this like door is just, there's nothing to it. You find that, I think they call it realism, but it's not very real. It's got a lot of details stripped from it, right? What's the sidewalk? The sidewalk is just a splash of green color from the inside of this diner or whatever. The diner is not realistic at all. This is not a realistic plane for things to sit on. None of these are bad. This is not a criticism against it. I'm just kind of pointing out what I see. What we have is almost something that's like going from impressionism to something more real. It's a gesture towards the idea that's behind it. Notice how empty everything is. There's people on the inside, and then there's an emptiness on the outside. There's that sense of coziness that people get obsessed with on like 4chan. You have people separate from each other. This guy's alone even though he's in a crowd. The inside's very sparse. The outside is really sparse. There's nothing out there. Like it might as well, it's like a deserted city in the middle of the night. It's like being on the moon and you're inside the space station here. So you could get almost the same feeling as if you had astronauts sitting in a bubble and then this is like the moon or like Mars or something out there. You'd get the same feeling from something like this. He's got a cigarette. We don't know what they're saying. We see the details, right? Like the little napkin holders and stuff like that, the coffee stuff. It's just a gesture towards the real. Phillies, right? It's very cool, and I like it. Another thing to look at with art like this is what colors are there. There's actually far fewer colors than what a lot of people think should be in art. And I always like to point this out because people think there needs to be lots of colors. Like they're looking at a Baroque painting that has a huge color palette. What do we have? We have greens and we have reds. So everything here boils down to a really limited color palette. If you look at the guy in white here, and notice it's mixed with that blue-green color, right? A lot of people kind of filter that out, but yeah, everything's mixed with the blue-green color. The silver is actually blue-green. This is all a desaturated red, so you've mixed it with black and you mixed it with black and a little bit of white, and this same thing. You have just different mixtures of red. This is all green, the teal color, that green blue. This guy's suit is blue. The hat is green. She's of course wearing a bright red dress, so the focus on her, orange or red hair, red dress. It's the same colors here. Just this is like a more fully saturated red. There's not too much difference in here. And then this is the same color as this, just mixed with different amounts of white and black to get all these colors. The orange is a little different, right? That's a darkened, might be just a darkened yellow. So the yellow is the only big contrasting color, like the yellow and white. Otherwise, it's all this red and kind of teal color. Very cool to look at. And I think if you look at a lot of his stuff, you'll find that there's similar things going on. Office at Night, right? Let's look at the Office at Night. This is a good one, too. So, you can see like the grain of the canvas here. Green and this desaturated red for all of the browns here. Green and brown. Her dress is blue. It's not too far from the green. His suit is actually green. The lamp is green. The typewriter's green. It's like something from the Matrix, right? This is green. This is green. The white is really kind of mixed in with green. So you're left with a feeling of few colors. Things feel very sparse and empty. There's a few little papers here or there. It's like impressionism with detail almost. What do they call that? I think they call that modern realism. It's not something I've studied a whole lot by myself. Yeah. Would you ever consider printing an old school pulp paperback run? I got your big Christmas book, but it's too big to read in the tub. So yeah, the problem with... So if we look at a pulp paperback, I have lots of small paperbacks. I have a lot of small paperbacks that aren't super big. Right. They're all print on demand. If you're looking at something that's really like cheap, super cheap paper and stuff like that, the problem with that is you got to print huge runs of it. And so the modern publishing apparatus doesn't support that as well, and certainly not with my platform. I would need to be able to print like 100,000 copies of a book to make something that was like that. It's really hard to sell 100,000 copies of a book. You'd be in like top 10 authors to do that. People read more books in the past, so you were able to have more pulp publishing style stuff in the past. Yeah, liminal. That's a great word for this. That's a great word for like this kind of stuff. It's a transitory feeling. So a liminal space is transitory. Right? Notice that the copies, they take all the colors out. Someone painted a copy of this and they didn't get it. They didn't get what this was at all. That's wild. You can get these Etsy copies, and like, what did they do? They made the colors realistic, which destroys the aesthetic of the painting. You know, an empty office, very liminal. There's a transitory space. Yeah, modern interpretation of Nighthawks would be Waffle House with a brawl occurring inside. Well, what I would draw is I'd draw a guy sitting at Denny's. And behind him is just like an empty parking lot out in Barstow, California. That's what I would paint. That'll give you the feeling. This feeling of like loneliness, even when there's other people around, people that are very lonely, kind of crossing paths in the night. You know, that kind of thing. Yeah, too many colors distracts the eyes. You want to be able to direct the eye to where you want. Yeah. So controlling color will direct the eye towards the focus of a painting. If you look at something like this, like the painting of the focus, like the focus is still in the middle. If you look at Nighthawks, the focus is this lonely guy is literally in the middle of the painting, and there's loneliness outside, and there's kind of loneliness inside because he's separated from these people. He's not really talking to them. You know, it's a cool way to think about it. Modern redesign. Hotel room. Hotel room is another good one. Let's see if we can find hotel room. I have to back up a bunch of Edward Hopper. What's this one? Morning sun. Notice it's like people that are very alone. Oh yeah, you can't see this. Hold on. It's like people that are really alone. He must have been a lonely guy. Right? Notice this coziness. Inside is the modern safe. Outside is American fields. Here's a lonely person sitting by themselves. Here's a person waking up, and again, this transitory space, a window from the inside where you're secure and sleepy to the outside. You know, a gas station with only one person in it. No people on the street. You know, a street without people, very liminal. Here's a person sitting in a theater, I guess, or something. This one's two people. A person looking out a window by herself. Actually, I don't know if he painted that one. You know, kind of impressionistic. The view here of what's going on. Oh, this is Midjourney. Midjourney did this one. Did Midjourney do a good job? I would say they didn't, because of the style of the brushstrokes is way off. Right, this like high contrast areas, he never did that. But it has some of the same. Really, there shouldn't be people. There should be no people. One person and then no other people is how you're going to get the feeling across. Right. People separate from each other. Modern people not together. Modern people alone, separate. This dude seems super lonely. Let's find any other ones. What was the hotel room? I might have already looked at it. Yeah, it's just a person by herself in a cluttered room. You know? Inside, outside, inside, outside. Notice he's always like a picture of a window looking out on something. Kind of interesting. Interesting to think about. You kind of like if you cozy threads do this, liminal space threads will do this on 4chan and places like that. maybe Reddit, all the same stuff. Batman 2022 has a scene with imagery based on Nighthawks. It's a scene of the Riddler drinking coffee in a diner, shot from outside right before a SWAT team arrests him. That's cool. I haven't watched the new Batman. Yeah, it's simple shapes. It's a gesture towards the real. It's very, in fact, I would call this style on the cold side. Talk about cold versus hot media. Now, it's detailed, but it's on the cold side because it really is a gesture towards the real, not the real itself. It's not like a photograph. You're missing lots of details. Yes, the correct forms are there to represent a door, a window, a person, a filing cabinet, a window, right? A typewriter. Those forms are all there, but the high amount of detail is missing. That's not a bad thing. We don't need that. In fact, if we had that detail, I think it would hurt the aesthetic of the piece quite a bit. Same thing with Nighthawks. The whole point of there's no details in here. They took all the merchandise out of the window when they closed, so people wouldn't steal it. There's something here, we don't know what it is. It's like at night, you can't see those details. Well, in a lot of cases, you can't see the details. When you're walking through the city, you're left with an impression of what the city felt like. You're not remembering a lot of details. But maybe you remember the girl, right? You remember like one person you came across, the girl. You might remember, being alone or something. There'd be a lot of details in the street, right? You'd see like grit here, you'd see lines from the concrete. You don't need that. That's not what it's about. It's about that inside-outside feeling. And so I really like that. There were a number of modern period painters that pursued aesthetics that have been pretty, to me, this is a pretty persistent and good aesthetic, right? Like, this will make sense to people 100 years later, because I think we are almost 100 years later at this point. Just like how romantic period stuff will. Whereas now, if you were to look at postmodern sculpture or something, you'd be like, what is it, right? It's like, it's whatever you want it to be. It's like, okay, interesting. Versus, it doesn't evoke a feeling in you. Whereas this, you can look at it and I feel something from looking at this painting. When I think about like one of my favorite artists are mostly from the 19th century. I have some favorite Baroque artists like Jacob Jordaens, but like I think of like Waterhouse. So John Waterhouse paintings. Let's look at some. Right, the pre-Raphaelite movement. He drew like the same woman over and over again. This woman with like this more pronounced Roman nose. There's a huge amount of detail in these paintings. There's a lot of emotion in them. There's a lot of colors. Notice he doesn't use a limited color palette. Rather, there's lots of colors, and then there's something that really draws your eye. Red. This is where we're seeing red, and there's not a lot of other red in the painting. And at the same time, the center of the painting is actually not the woman. It's what's beyond. It's the castle. It's where she is. This is really the center of the painting, is this castle. Where's the one he did a great one at Cleopatra. There's a really famous one he did. Here it is. Boom. This like intense stare, but she's not looking at the at the artist, not looking at the quote the camera eye. What we think about now is camera eye. You know, she's looking away. What are the colors here? This is a fairly limited color palette. It's mostly yellow. A little bit of pink, right? A little bit of red. Same idea here. The woman in red is the center. But next to her is this romantic idea of a journey with these boats. There's a globe. Right, so you have a romantic view of a journey. Right, what's she looking out at? She's looking at this shipwreck. It's very romantic. Really, I mean, in terms of period, we'd probably call it like the post-romantic. Versus, who's one of my favorite romantic ones? Probably Caspar David Friedrich. It's probably my favorite. I had Jesse White on a couple times, and he and I think, share a particular love of this guy's images. So there's a really famous one here. This guy looking out upon the mist. It's a very evocative image. Again, kind of liminal. He's dressed well, he's got a cane, and he's looking out on wilderness. This is a really common theme with romantic period stuff, is evoking the feelings of nature, the feelings of being in a place, the feelings of a space. You know, these two guys, and he draws a lot of new moons, right? One of my favorites is one called A Walk at Dusk, which I wrote a book called A Walk at Dusk that I need to put out. I need to put out the book. I wrote it years ago from a story that I came up with way long ago. But yeah, this is a good one. You know, a place. Ruins. This is like a ruined abbey, right? What are they calling it? Gothic melancholy. Very common with romantic period stuff, right? Like a fallen monastery. England is full of these, by the way. There's like abandoned monasteries because Henry VIII like destroyed all the monastic orders. My mom draws paintings like this. I should bring in some of my mom's paintings. But I like the figures. I like figures in them. Gives you a different emotional feeling. Right. These people looking out at the ships as they sail away. What else do we get? What's this one again? Oh yeah. It draws people with these hats. Let's see. Walk at Dusk. This is at the Getty Museum. If you ever go there. Let's take a look at this. There we go. So this is a small painting. It's about this big. Very small painting that has these details. That's why you can see these cracks in this one. It's got this guy with this hat, and he's at this pile of rocks that looks like a tomb. Again, a new moon. New moon representing a transitory state, that liminal state that we talked about. What colors are here? Well, they're all very desaturated colors. Blue. The trees are, you know, like, oh, well, they're going to be brown, right? But if you look really close, you're like, oh, they're blue. The trees are actually blue. You mix down the blue to get this sense of color. These trees in the mist have to be blue, just a darker shade of blue, so that they look appropriate here. Right, and you can see the individual brush strokes here. And if you see this in person, or any of these paintings, if you see them in person, you get a different sense of what the painting is about in a lot of cases, because you can see the brush strokes better. You can see what the artist did. You can see where he layered the paint on. In some cases, the background is sticking out of the painting. You see this with a lot of Van Gogh paintings. The background is in front of the foreground physically when you see it, because he painted that afterwards rather than building up from the background. He painted the background later, and so there's more paint on the background than there is in the foreground. It produces a weird effect when you see it, but you can see the individual strokes and how he first drew these, and then he overlaid them, and then he went over them again with this blue, and then this is brown. Brown is usually like, yellow or orange that's really desaturated, mixed with a lot of black and a lot of white. Well, not a lot of white, a lot of black and then a little bit of white. That's how you get this details of these flowers. These are teeny tiny. I mean, like, they're really small when you see something like this live. And then, of course, red. The only really saturated color is this guy's coat that he's wearing in this cold morning or cold evening at dusk in autumn, I think, based on the way the trees look. So makes me think of October, makes me think of autumn, all those things. Yeah. Liminal circles, yeah. If you're into liminal circles, hey, you got to look at this Edward Hopper paintings. You see it a lot with romantic art too. Artists love to capture that feeling of a threshold. You'll even see it with Baroque and medieval art, but it's less apparent what that threshold is. You'll see a stark contrast maybe between the inside and the inside of heaven, the outside of hell, something like that in a religious painting. Yeah. He uses odd dimensions too that likely adds to the offness. Yeah, there's just some things that are just, it's a gesture towards the real. It's a colder medium. It's a colder style than the romantic, which came before it. Different media have used that painting more often than you'd think. What do you think of Norman Rockwell? So Norman Rockwell, I like Norman Rockwell paintings. These are, let's look up some Norman Rockwell. This is the guy who gets looked at. I mean, his paintings have become memes again in the 2020s, which is just fantastic. Norman Rockwell paintings evoke a kind of silliness to me. All of them do. What is he gesturing towards? It's a still life, right? To me, there's a joviality to all of his paintings, even ones that seem rather serious. There's an expression of like, I don't know what the word is. I love this one. The girl at the principal's office with the black eye. It's jovial. There's a joy to life. People's joys of living modern life. Whereas Hopper is looking very bleakly at the modern existence. Rockwell is like, he's using nostalgia even in the moment that he's making a thing, right? There's a joyful remembrance. This is the way people remember things. It's colored through a certain lens, where we look back appreciatively on it. Look at all the details. There's so many details in a painting like this. No, I don't want you updates. Here we go. Look at all the details. You have this guy holding a Japanese flag. Garage man, a hero. Everybody's staring at him, and he has a different expression on. That's more like, I don't know what you want from me. All the colors, all the details are there. There's still fewer colors than people realize. It's mostly red and blue. Still cool, though. Yeah, I like Norman Rockwell. Very, very different feeling than most 20th century art, though. This is more what I would call the illustrative style, which was still very popular all the way through the 20th century. It's the kind of stuff you'd see in magazines and on book covers. And I feel like most people that graduated from art school would be capable of producing illustrative art all the way up through maybe the 80s. At a certain point, the art professors who had these skills started to die off, and now most of what I see graduating from arts programs would be utterly incapable of understanding why they might want to paint a painting like this, as well as they just wouldn't have the skills to do it. And at the same time, a lot of people are like, why do this? Why not just like take a photo? It's because paintings have more to them than photos, right? You can't perfectly pose all of these expressions. You can try. You can try to duplicate this as a photo, but it won't have the same vitality, because each of these is an amalgam of times, an amalgam of spaces, like a condensation of multiple feelings kind of put into one point in time. He's smelling her corsage. He's looking on appreciatively, right? All of these expressions. Being able to master these expressions, and a lot of them are like exaggerated to get the point across. Normal people don't express like this very often. It's all exaggerated. This is very realistic, but it's a good picture. Yeah, I like Norman Rockwell stuff. Very cool to look at. Obviously, when people are talking about modern art, they don't think of Norman Rockwell. They're like, oh, he doesn't count because people like him. That's my whole point. It's like, there's an artificial sort of academic belief that things can't be popular and meaningful. I get this feeling a lot when I drive at night. It's part of the reason I do it. I used to love like driving across the desert at night. I drive between LA and Las Vegas, Bakersfield and Las Vegas. When I left Las Vegas, we did it at nighttime. When I moved in, we did it at nighttime. So when I left, we got out and we drove in the middle of the night. We stopped at a Denny's in Barstow. Actually, probably not in Barstow, probably in Baker. If there is one in Baker, that's the one we stopped at. Out in the middle of the desert, no one there. You know, pulling a trailer with everything we owned. And I remember my roommate who was driving with me at the time, I think we drove up to Modesto at that time. He called me up because, you know, if that trailer like exploded, I think I'd be okay. Everything I value is in my car. He was driving his little Ford Focus. Everything I value is in my car. He had his dog, his computer, his guitars. And I was like, yeah, that's a good point. Everything that was valuable to me was in my pickup, not in the trailer that was dragging all our furniture. Like, really, our furniture was practically worthless. We could have just thrown it away. You know. I wonder if you like more rough paintings. Yeah, they have different feelings, you know. There's a Vivaldi album cover with that deserted abbey. Yeah. I used it as a cover for one of my singles. No, the Getty Lee Museum, no, it's called the Getty. It's in LA. It's an art museum. It has some really good Baroque art, too. One of the few places where I can think of like, oh, you can see really good Baroque art. It's at the Getty Museum. Norman Rockwell's pooped on because spiteful mutants hate the America he portrays. Yeah, it's relatable. Well, people think like, oh, you know, they look at the subject, not the technique. Maybe. And that's where he shines. It's the emotion. It's much more in tune with like Romanticism than what would be most modern styles. When with my ex, a girl that could paint in the classical style was put into the B room. Perfect technical skill, but a political piece with minimal skill got into the A room. Yeah. I like Thomas Cole. Maybe a little gimmicky, but I like his theme series. It's the life cycle of a man and the cycle of an empire. It was insufferable. The art school prioritized the current thing and whose parents gave enough donations. Very little had to do with student ability. I've been to Baker, beautiful desert. I went to Pahrump, Nevada for front sight. Oh, that's cool. It's always popular to poo-poo, like Thomas Kinkade. Why do people hate Thomas Kinkade? They're like, oh, it's not realistic. It's cheesy. Thomas Kinkade paintings communicate a certain feeling. I remember I had a friend whose brother was an art major. His art was awful, but he hated Thomas Kinkade. That was like the guy he thought of when he's like bad art. And I'm like, what? I get that it's boomers like to put up Thomas Kinkade paintings and they like them, but does that mean it's bad? I don't really think so. Like, let's look at some Thomas Kinkade because that'd be fun. Let's look at some Thomas Kinkade pictures. Some of them are like, so look at this. Why is this bad? It's bad because it's boring. I don't think it's boring though. It's really full of life and light. The light is not realistic. It's overly light. It's not realistic at all. But it's more kind of in the romantic idea. It's evoking an emotion of a place. Sunflowers and this and that. My main complaint about Thomas Kinkade would just be that like his art is kind of boring. It's so busy. But even though it's so busy, and it's in a lot of ways very technically proficient, there's just not a lot of interesting things. This is like a Disney one he did, I guess. What is this? Yeah. There's just nothing to this. It like does nothing. Like I don't hate it, but it's boring, right? It's like we got to do a painting that's got everything in it. There's no negative space in this painting at all. It's like there's a sky. You might have some negative space there. Better put a sun. Better put a rainbow. Better put that one seagull. Better put a boat. No negative space allowed. Is there ocean? Better put some dolphins. Is there a hill? Better put some castles on it. Flowers, better put some birds looking at the and then we look closely at the forms there and they're a little off, but it doesn't matter. It's just so busy. It's very Baroque in that sense. No negative space, but it doesn't evoke majesty or anything like that. It's just busy. There's just a lot in it. So that's my complaint about Thomas Kinkade, but I find this like more pleasing. It's not realistic at all. This is Thomas Kinkade inspired, so that's probably why I like it better. Look at this. It's very Baroque. It's very Baroque. But it doesn't feel like Baroque paintings to me. If I pull up like actual Baroque paintings, they're not quite like this. Like there's so much. Very different from what we were looking at, But you can see why he'd be popular in the Disney gift shop. It's very whimsical. The high detailed whimsical thing. This is a thing that you could put on your wall and you could look at it 1,000 times and see something a little bit different every time, and that's cool. This Alice in Wonderland thing. Super, super details. Millions of details. This is a little more my speed. It's just a covered bridge, a bunch of snow. But like, what's the focus? Like the bridge. This is actually a boring focus. This is kind of boring. Lion King one. Some deer. What's in the middle here? It's like a cabin. A little waterfall. It's nice. It's pleasant. It's pleasant to look at. This is like a Frank Lloyd Wright home. It's nice. It's pleasant. Very pleasant to look at. It's like a pleasant place you'd want to be. But it's missing something, I feel like. I feel like it's missing something. That I just feel nothing from his paintings most of the time. I don't believe he's bad at what he does. I think he's super technically proficient. It takes a lot of skill to do this. I just don't find it that interesting. Bob Ross was dismissed when he was painting, and he's still dismissed today, but his works still command respectable sums. But that probably has more to do with his persona, yeah. Yeah, I think these are the sort of paintings you could put up on a wall and just look at them and enjoy the little details. You know. I'm just going to Google Baroque paintings just to see what Google comes up with. To see like sort of what kind of stuff Google thinks is Baroque. I love Baroque music. Everybody knows I love Baroque music. This Diego Velázquez. This is a very famous piece. Can I take a closer look at it? Let's take a little closer. Oh yes. So this is a really wild piece. So different, right? I told Thomas Kinkade Baroque is in grotesque. That's the word. A Baroque is a kind of pearl. It's this kind of grotesque, misshapen pearl. So what's the subject? The subject is this princess. She's at the center. There's a painting of her parents in the background. The painter himself is in the picture, the artist. This is Diego Velázquez, I believe. You have some siblings. You have a dog. You have... I'm not sure who this is. You have another room that's looking out on some other part of the palace with like a statesman there. And then the background is all very... You know, there's beautiful paintings in the background. He doesn't really paint them. He just gives you a gesture towards them. And that's all you need. It's very creative, very strange when you think about it. What are some other ones? No, I don't want Las Meninas now. I just want... What do you think Baroque paintings are, Google? Oh, yes. You could look at the Wikipedia one, but... Girl with a pearl earring. This is... Notice that there's no background. Not everything from like the 17th century had like super intense, you know, everything going on like, Sistine Chapel's really Renaissance, but Baroque stuff was about kind of evoking majestic things for the most part. Hyper detailed, you know, gigantic paintings with tons of figures, and the human figures represented so perfectly and so well with such an intense lighting. Narcissus. You know, Mary. Sort of mythical feeling here. Notice that great painters use a lot of negative space. Negative space is just areas where you don't have details. You don't need a lot of details in the sky. You gesture towards the background in the sky. That's also why the Mona Lisa is good. The background is a gesture, you know. You have some details here. You have some details out here. Just kind of a gesture towards... Imagine this town out here. Imagine this bridge. Imagine what this temple was with these people here in the Seder, right? Sometimes Baroque art could be silly. If you like... and look, you can actually play this music here, which is kind of fun. Let's look up some like Jacob Jourdain's. Jacob Jourdain's. This is how he painted himself. Right? I believe this is his self-portrait. Self-portraits were not like a huge thing at the time, if I remember right. Is that a flattering painting? Not really. In fact, he draws attention to the unflattering details of his subjects. That's why I love his art so much. Let's find a really good one. You know, he draws attention to his cheeks here. kind of flabby cheeks and the circles under his eyes through this lighting, this very, not harsh, but soft lighting. You know, he drew people looking rather grotesque at times, which was fun. Like this guy with this cat. This is an exaggeration of a person. Same thing with the cat. The cat's an exaggeration as well. He would draw these like bar scenes of like peasants playing, you know, singing around at bars, and like this woman holding a baby, and everybody's looking weird, you know. He like purposefully would focus on grotesque details. People being very fat, people being very lean. He did this great famous painting of Prometheus, I think. That I've used. Prometheus Bound. Let's see if I can find a better one. Prometheus having his there it is. Liver eaten by an eagle. I believe this is Hermes. As punishment for giving fire to man. The figure is turned over. He's upside down. His expression is upside down. We can't really see expressions on faces very well when they're misoriented, when they're upside down. You know, but he doesn't shy away from the details of the body. I mean, like, I know that the genitalia is covered up here and here, but like the details of the skin, of the musculature, this is not really anatomically correct. How you would draw like a, you know, like a bicep, or like the forearm doesn't quite look right. It's more of a gesture towards that, right? This is not really how a forearm looks, or how the muscles bend and come together. It's sort of purposefully more grotesque. And of course, back in the Baroque, you had this thing where a lot of our masters, Baroque masters, wouldn't have painted the entire painting. They would have just painted the face and the hands, and then the apprentices would have done the rest. The way people talk about Kinkade, you think it was visually and thematically offensive. It's all just fine. Yeah, it's just not that interesting. He's a commercial artist, and he does what gets him paid. You see it in the Disney gift shop because people like to have that kind of stuff up. It makes them feel the nostalgia for Disneyland to have the painting of Disneyland by Thomas Kinkade. Thomas Kinkade once urinated on a Winnie the Pooh statue at the Disneyland Hotel in Anaheim while saying, "This one's for you, Walt." What an interesting story. Rembrandt was in the Raising of the Cross. Oh, he put himself in it. That's right. My favorite Rembrandt is the Night Watch. Let's find that one. Oh, this is a really classic painting. Yes, I know this one. Such a good example of the Baroque. Let's take a look at it. Look at all the figures. Look at all the detail. There's still some negative space. This is all cast in shadow. The flag. The red sash in the middle of the painting looks so cool. There's even some kids, you know. There's a lot going on. But while there's a lot going on, the faces tend to be doing a lot of communication, where they're looking, what they're gesturing towards. There's a lot going on. All the pikes. So like capturing the Baroque style is more than just an abundance of detail, I think, and an abundance of figures, for instance. It's about having those things, but they move, they flow across. You know, they're not a jumble. There's still a lot of negative space. There's still a lot of details in the negative space, but this is stuff that is in the visual area, but we don't need the details here. There's even a kind of a shadow of a dog down there. Yeah, you don't need those details. It's so fun to look at those stuff. Jean-Honoré Fragonard. See if I know anything. Wait, let's take a look at some of these paintings. These are fun. Kind of 18th century. More classical. You can see that you get a style developing in the 18th century that is a little brighter, maybe. A little bit more about the central subject, less about a giant scene, two people. It's kind of pushing towards the romantic. People out in nature. This would be really common in the 19th century. I think, pretty sure this is a joke. Pretty funny joke. There's a way that they drew faces in the 18th century that's kind of weird to me. Very, very pale skin. Right? The wide set eyes, the kind of scrunched face that you see in 18th century paintings, especially of women. Like it's an exaggeration. This makes, if you were to just look at the face, the neck is a little too long. You have some exaggerations of some features. It's an idealistic view of a female face that looks almost too young. The eyes are a bit too big. Notice the lips are small. They only kind of barely reach the edges of the eyes. Whereas a more realistic mouth, maybe by the same painter here, you'll see that it's closer to the iris. But even then, notice by putting the iris off here, he's looking to the askance. It makes his mouth appear smaller. If you just painted him straight on, he'd look like he had a bigger mouth. Generally, the edges of the mouth line up with the eyes in ideal proportions. But we can kind of see in the 18th century that the eyes are widened so that you get this more triangular almost appearance to the face. The jaw is smaller. It's more gracile, especially on female figures. I think that's really, really different from what I see a lot from 18th century stuff. I'm not an art history expert by any means, but I just love looking at paintings. Yeah, I like it. I like the scenes. I like the compositions. Start moving towards a more romantic style that's a very personal. A girl, her dog, some tree, kind of a hazy background. You get a feeling of emotion. She's carving something in the tree that matters. Again, the color of her dress might have been brighter when it was painted too. These things do fade over time. The red curtains, almost representing rape here, right? It's good stuff. Are you brave enough to critique the Austrian painter who must not be named? I didn't find his paintings super interesting. They're not like technically bad, but I don't know. Look at you can look at early Van Gogh. Early Van Gogh is very realistic. It's very strange compared to like what he did later. Such a big no-no in modern art. Can't have any empty space. More flattering than reality. Yeah. Joseph Decroux painted a bunch of humorous self-portraits. I love that kind of joviality in Jacob Jourdain's. Even when things are... He could paint something that's, like, very intense, and there's almost a joviality sometimes to it. Like in that Prometheus thing. If it isn't Baroque, don't fix it. Peter Bruegel was well known for painting the mundane. So this was there was a whole thing called Dutch genre paintings, which were just about painting like mundane things. It's from where we get the idea of like genres. So like Dutch genre paintings, we'll look some. Dutch genre painting. It's stuff from like like the Baroque, the early Baroque. Let's look at some. I think they're fun to look at. Here's some peasants singing a song, drinking, having expressions, being silly. A bunch of details of, the dog is eating the cake or the food. Nobody's paying attention. He's playing a viol. She's got a funny expression on her face. That genre painting is full of interesting stuff. Sometimes it can be very emotional. Sometimes it's intended to just represent the realities of basic life, and people like to look at those. Peasant life as a curiosity. You see lots of paintings of peasants holding lutes and things like that. The point of the genre painting is really about the subject and how you feel about the subject, and not as much about the technique. The technique, though, is often really, really good. These wonderful details. Look at my eggs! Look at my eggs! She's like, I'm not looking at his eggs. Yeah, I do like Dutch genre paintings. They're fun to look at. Would Jourdain's be considered perverse? I don't think so. Perverse would be like perverted. I use the word grotesque, meaning like overly detailed and like maybe misshapen. But perverse would be like he's painting pictures of buttholes or something. I don't think so, personally. Look up John Martin paintings. Oh, yes. Okay, so there's a couple good ones that I'm thinking of here. This is kind of romantic period stuff. Right? This, like, paintings of, like, Sodom and Gomorrah and Pandemonium. I love this stuff, this kind of imaginary architecture. Very, very cool. Yeah, he did wood panel stuff too, I think, like engraved blocks for like printing in black and white. I believe this is Pandemonium. Oops. No, I wanted the painting. I think this is Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And this is Pandemonium. I love these sort of larger-than-life disaster pics. Oh, that's wonderful stuff. There's one I'm thinking of. by him, but I'm not seeing it. Here's a picture of Golgotha. Calvary. Yeah, I'm not seeing the one I'm thinking of. I might be thinking of a different painter. Different artist. I think this is actually the Fall of Troy. Is this Troy? That's the crucifixion. Love those, like, really fantastical views. The use of light, this contrast of light, so darkness and light. Big pyramids. This is like the plagues of Egypt or something. Really great. Sort of strong contrast in light. It's really good. Anyway, yeah, I like it. Let's see what other people are talking. We're just looking at paintings this time. Even in the past, hands are so hard to draw, only the master was allowed to do it. Yep. Hands are hard. Feet are hard too. I like Fragonard. I have a print on my wall at the house. I love the armor and Baroque paintings. Speaking of Baroque, I was supposed to see Yngwie Malmsteen this Friday, but the hurricane postponed him. Now I'm stuck with a motel reservation I can't cancel. Super chat. Thank you for the super chat, Elijah. Great stream. Love the background music. How would you compare Frank Frazetta or Alan Lee to their contemporaries in commercial art? So I love Frank Frazetta. Frazetta has his own unique style. Very good for commercial art. Alan Lee is more in the illustrative realm, I would say. So I like Alan Lee's art. I don't think Alan Lee's art makes great covers for the most part. There are some exceptions. Because he does those watercolor paintings. And for book covers, this is just a commercial thing. For book covers, you really want higher contrast images than what Alan Lee typically does. But I love his art. I think it's great. I was very critical of the latest edition of the Alan Lee illustrated Lord of the Rings box set because they chose really bad paper. And so it just, like, the ink bled into the paper, and all of his paintings, though they're watercolor, right? So they're not supposed to be high contrast, but they all just kind of bled into the page and looked like crap. Whereas I have other editions from his where they printed them on legitimately good paper instead of thin, like, recycled garbage, and they look so much sharper in those other editions. There's really no comparison. I'm glad you like the background music. It's me. I'll copy it. Oh yeah, I didn't address why there hasn't been a lot of new music on the Zool channel. I've been focusing. I wanted to do 1 year of improvisational music. I got to that 1 year. I didn't finish 100 improvs. So I would like to finish off the entire set and have 100 improvisational pieces on the channel. I think I'm actually missing some of the early ones as well. So I will try to clean that up and make sure I have the early ones even though they suck, because I was still learning what the hell I was doing with all of my equipment. It's okay. I wanted to document the learning process. So, got to a year, took a step back. I have made significant progress towards mastery of that style, and I feel pretty good about it. And I'm pretty happy with a couple of the bigger ones I did, like the Rain 1 hour long piece that I did. Some of the pieces I did where I went out and improvised while it's raining on me. Those were really fun. But I needed to, I took 2 weeks and I worked way ahead on blog and YouTube content so that I could really focus on getting a couple of books done that have been kind of hanging over my head. Revisions and rewrites and stuff. I needed to get those done. So I'm trying to put all my eggs in that basket. Then, of course, my uncle died. I needed to perform at his funeral, so that meant I had to take time. I lost about a week and a half of work doing new arrangements for pieces for that. So I had to basically do new compositions and then practice those. And I made them. I make things hard on myself. I did kind of complicated arrangements, very contrapuntal. So like, they took more practice than if I had just done something simple and stupid. But I'm always bad about. I make everything hard on myself. I got to do the hardest version of whatever it is. So I lost some time on that. No big deal. I'll be finishing that up. What am I working on? Mainly, it is the next 3 Moonsong books. So trilogy number 2 of this series. That's what I am going to try to get done. Once I have that done, I'm going to feel like I can pause on a lot of my focus on this and take stock on what I want to do next creatively. Do I want to do the game? Do I want to do a visual novel? Do I want to do an album of more thoroughly composed music? What do I want to do? There's so many options, right? So that's what, that's what I'm doing. So, yeah. Going back to the super chat, which I appreciate. Frank Frazetta. So Frank Frazetta is a commercial artist in the illustrative style. I love his art. It's very good for fantasy art. He did some of the most classic fantasy paintings and drawings you can think of. I have nothing bad to say about Frank Frazetta. His stuff is exaggerated. He exaggerates the female form. And there's parts of the female form he exaggerates in ways that other artists don't, especially comic artists. So let's take a look at Frank Frazetta, because I would love to point out how he emphasizes the female forms versus how maybe a modern Marvel comic artist would emphasize those same forms. Very different. So let's take a look at this one. This is a John Carter thing, I think. So notice we're not dealing with tons of details. Again, this was something that had to be done commercially, which meant he was on a timeline to do it. Notice that the emphasis is on this shape of this hip. Notice that she has a belly and that her breasts are hanging very naturally. They're drawing a human breast so that it hangs naturally from the armpits and to the sternum. He was very good at that. The male form is exaggerated too, very muscular, an exaggeration of the chest and shoulder muscles. These forms, however, are actually, Jesse White pointed this out on his what do you want to call it? His Patreon, I think. This is a realistic body proportion in terms of height. So you will exaggerate or unexaggerate the height of figures. A heroic height would be like 8 heads. This is like a 5.5 or 6 head Conan. Realistic. What's exaggerated is these definitions of the muscles, the striations. The muscle bellies are huge. This is actually not a good stance. If you wanted to stand in this stance, you would look very weak, because if you're flexing your pecs and getting your shoulders together, it's like you're collapsing your energy forwards, right? Maybe I could show you big, right? On here, maybe just from the waist up, right? So if you're sitting with your shoulders back and your chest out, you look a lot wider and bigger than if you're trying to flex your pecs in. Now you might be able to see, I'm not going to take my shirt off because I'm all flabby right now, but you're not going to see, you can kind of see the shoulders are slightly emphasized. If you had big shoulders, it might look like that. If you're doing like a most muscular pose and like really, but if you're wanting to just look big, it's actually shoulders back, chest out, has a bigger look. So the exaggeration really is in the musculature. Let's find another female form. This one's good. Again, you have an emphasis on the midsection is not flat, right? He draws the fat on the midsection. He draws the fat on the thighs. All his girls are a little thick around here because that's the way he likes them. But it's actually more, it's an emphasis on certain natural traits of the female body that doesn't show up in a Marvel artist. If I were to look up like And again, these figures are kind of short. Open image in new tab. There we go. Oh, come on. That's not what I wanted. Whatever. If you're looking at a Marvel artist, they would minimize the midsection. The midsection would be thin waist, flat, right? No emphasis of hips or fat on the body. He draws fat on the human body, especially the female form. He draws a woman who has fat on her body, not in a like a gross way or like they're fat, but the natural way that human fat accumulates on the female body. Let's see if we can get this one. See if we can get. Oh, that's too small. Yeah. So this is actually, this breast is a little weird, but okay. Yeah, look at this one. What's the emphasis on the female form here? Notice that her hips are bigger, and this is the way anatomy really works. There's a more pronounced belly above the pubic region. So to me, this is more like a realistic, it's a gesture towards parts of the female form that are not emphasized a lot today. But it's very sexually provocative to me. There's also this separation on the muscles here and the glutes. And you can see this kind of digging into her flesh a little bit. She's got a lot of fat on her body. And that's actually attractive, I think. Let's see if I could find another really good example. Looked at some of these. This is a classic. This is all male form, though. In action. He doesn't use references. He just draws based on his knowledge of anatomy, and there's so much more dynamic motion in his paintings, I think, than someone like Kinkade. Like let's look at another commercial artist. Let's look at Kinkade. I think that's who. When I had Jesse White on, that's who we compared, was Kinkade. Kinkade did this famous Kiss thing. He did the Rainbow Rising cover. He did the covers of the Manowar albums. But he uses like bodybuilder references. So things look really realistic, but they don't have as much dynamic power as Frank Frazetta. The Frank Frazetta really is superior. Though I think Kinkade's art is awesome. You know, you can see it's very much the way a person would pose. It's good. It's really good. But it's more the way a person would pose. It looks like a bodybuilder. Whereas the Frazetta is just way more dynamic. Again, this emphasis on... doesn't shy away from showing she has belly fat. Very provocative, I think. This lizard monster. Look at all the negative space that he put paint on the canvas for. You don't need it. You don't need all this. You're in the swamp. You know what's up. This one's great. 1967. Look at this pose. Look how dynamic it is. Look how much power and like tension there is. With this straight line going through here. Very good. It's good stuff. Yeah. Compared to, yeah, if you look at more Kinkade stuff, it's good. Like Kinkade stuff is really good. I love his Manowar covers. They're great. But you can see it's hyper detailed. It's realistic in a way that takes some of the, just takes a little bit of the power away from it. It's still very good. Still like it a lot. But it looks like it uses more references. Not like Greg Land where he's like tracing. He doesn't trace, but he uses like bodybuilders as a reference. There's a YouTube channel that shows AI recreations of people portrayed in ancient through modern art. It's quite impressive. The Isle of the Dead. Yes, that's a very famous one. I think he painted it a bunch of times. I think he painted it like 20, 30 times or something. He painted it like he was obsessed with it. He painted it over and over again. Edgar Allan Poe defined the perverse as something that one has an urge to do because one knows one should not. That's an interesting way. To me, perverse comes from, you know, when something's perverted, it's altered into something it shouldn't be. So that makes sense. I mean, more in the sense that the church would have used the term at the time. Not so much anuses. Well, he did a lot of religious art. Jourdain's did. And believe it or not, that kind of grotesque appearance, he used it for Christ. And it has a powerful effect because you're seeing Christ tortured on the cross. And an artist that painted a really realistic body on Christ without those grotesque details would not have been able to communicate, in my opinion, as much power as, you know, Christ actually being crucified. I wonder if Cecil D. DeMille was inspired by John Martin for some of the imagery in the Ten Commandments, especially the Red Sea sequence. Maybe. I think there's a whole there's a term for it, like make-believe architecture in art. I don't know the term. Someone else knows it, I'm sure. That's almost its own genre even now. My wife is going to do my book covers in oil canvas, and then we're going to scan it. Awesome. Or maybe acrylic. So either way, it's tough sometimes to scan it. What I might recommend is get a really high resolution good camera or borrow one from someone and take a good picture of it so that it is in the middle 2/3 or so of the frame. There's a few reasons for that. The DSLR camera, I don't have one here, but you know, a big camera. It has a big sensor. And you're going to put it in the middle of that where that sensor is going to get it. You're going to get a lot less visual distortion than if you took a picture of a phone, or if you have a flatbed scanner that can work, but those often don't work as well as a high quality camera, two-sided kind of off-axis lighting, and have it in the middle 2/3 of the frame. That's the best way that I've seen people able to capture art. You can probably look up on YouTube how people take pictures of art for this purpose. But that's some of the advice that I've gotten and I've seen people do. So, yeah. In my opinion, David Stevens was the master of drawing the female form. Take a look at some. The Rocketeer. Did some art for the Rocketeer. Yeah, this is more illustrative style. Here's a good one. Here. It's quite nice. You have this shape here. Very realistic, very sensual. This is like actual illustration, not like comic art inspired by previous comic art to look like comic art. You know, it's kind of the opposite of Greg Liefeld. I don't hate Greg Liefeld, but like, it's not technically as good as something like that. There's a good article comparing Frazetta to Boris Vallejo. That would be a good one too, yeah. Have you seen the Rocketeer crowdfunded comic that is active right now? It's sanctioned by Stevens' family, and some of the money is going towards research on the disease that took him. I read this as Fatukim. I'm like, what is this disease called? Fatukim. What is Fatukim? It sounds very exotic. She goes into why Frazetta is a better artist without dumping on Vallejo too much. we can make that comparison. I kind of chose Ken Kelly because I was thinking of his Conan art, but you're right, Boris Vallejo's are really good. Maybe that's the one that we did on the channel. Yeah, same idea. This is really good art. This is from one of the Gore novels, I think. You know, this tends to really lack a lot of punch here. This one's good. But they do look referenced. They look heavily referenced. Highly detailed, very accurate. Very hot. They're good, though. It's really good. You know, I appreciate... One of the things I like about Boris Vallejo is... when he paints, it's almost like a drawing, right? There's a limited color palette. Everything here is kind of coming out yellow. You have this highlight on her side there that's interesting. He's able to make use of like these sort of mid-range colors really well. I think we looked at some of this. This is good stuff. They're good paintings. Yeah, it's good stuff. I have some books with Luis Royo. The stuff reminds me of him. Don't know if you're familiar with him. I don't think so. I'm better than I used to be, but memorizing that level of detail still seems far beyond me. Having a really thorough knowledge of anatomy is an artistic challenge. Yeah. Eric Tieman's work on the Star Wars prequels. His artwork's gorgeous and very much like Romantic era landscape painting. I know Eric Tieman's did great looking art for the Galaxy's Edge theme park, but not his involvement in the prequels. I've been to both Galaxy's Edge. I've been to the one in Florida and the one in LA. Have you seen any of Joseph Ducreux's self-portraits? I haven't. Let's take a look before we go here. I'm about out of time. We just looked at art the whole time. It's the art stream. Yes, these are fun. This one's a meme. This one's a modern meme here too. Which is like you'll have like some meme text here like reject women, acquire money. Very jovial. Yawning. He could paint very technical stuff as well, besides just weird things and silly things. He could paint very technically as well. This makes me think of 18th century stuff for sure. Fun stuff. All right, I think that's about it for today. We just hung out and looked at art. Very fun. Very fun stuff. I'm not like an art history expert. I just love looking at art. I've studied it, but I don't remember a lot of names. And honestly, I'm the same way with music. If you're like random composer from the 18th century that's not like one of the big names, I'll be like, I have to really think about whether I know any music from that particular composer, right? Like I've listened to it all, but I haven't, I don't know, this is this piece by Leopold Mozart. It's like, what? I don't always remember that stuff. And I'm also not one of those people that has like a categorical, like catalog knowledge of any composer like Bach or whoever, where I can just remember, oh, this is BWV 898. Like, I don't know. this sounds like it's from the Baroque, and then like, oh, it's actually Robert de Vizier. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. This is John Dowland. It's like a Renaissance feel, right? I don't tend to have the kind of catalog knowledge that some people are able to have, you know. But I love art history because you can really see, for me, especially as a musician and as a writer, you could see how in each period there's kind of this ethos that develops, like this mindset that encapsulates what art is kind of about during that time, and what kind of aesthetics artists pursue and try to express. So if you're going to go back, I'll just give you like my big kind of overarching thesis about art history and music history and literature history, like the ethos of the arts. If you go back to the medieval period, most of what we have is religious art. That's what we have records of. So religious art is directed towards a specific purpose, that being the church. Doesn't mean that there wasn't art that common people did, especially music. Chances are people were playing lots of music on their lutes, in taverns, in chambers, on their clavichords in the medieval period. We just don't have a lot of records of it. It's kind of sparse. We have some lute tablature. We have some stuff maybe from, there's more English secular music from the medieval than there are kind of outside of that, but there is some. But most of what you see, especially from the high medieval, it's not really till you get to the late medieval that you start to see a lot of written music and new styles of composition. And so all of that was directed towards God's glory. And one of the things you pick up from late medieval to early Renaissance music is polyphony. That is multiple things going on, having really dense melodies. And that ends up in art, in the religious art, is something like the Sistine Chapel as kind of a prime example, where there's lots of figures and there's lots of stuff going on. There's many different subjects and many different themes, all existing at once. And that's supposed to be kind of a reflection of like the incredible complex glory of God's creation. And that's the ethos of the late medieval. As we go into the Baroque, you get a more thorough insertion of the artist. That's when you really start to get the artist is expressing himself and is not just going straight to the ethos of the time. You start to have artists that have particular styles, like Jacob Jourdain's being really different from a lot of other Baroque art. Still, there's lots of religious art. We start to see a lot more secular art. We see nobles commissioning art for themselves to enjoy or to commemorate themselves at various different levels. We have patronage of the arts beyond the church in a much bigger way. So the ethos of the Baroque is really about the skill involved in the creation of the art. You have things like fugues in music, which are really complex contrapuntal pieces. Very difficult to compose a fugue and do it really well at the level of someone like Johann Sebastian Bach or George Frederick Handel or Sylvius Weiss or Robert Vizier or any of these, Tony Vivaldi, any of these major Baroque composers that you have. While Palestrina's music in the Renaissance was really complex, Baroque music starts to be really diverse and have a lot going on. Many instruments being involved. It's where you start to first get orchestras. But the main ethos was about the skill. It's about displaying just how amazing and complex a piece of art can be. The skill of the artist is really up at the forefront. Over time, you get a couple of styles that come out of the Baroque as transitionary into the late 18th century styles, the classical styles, if you will, or neoclassical. It's sometimes called neoclassical because you have a revival of certain classical forms. Like the Washington, D.C. is in a neoclassical style. You have these like Corinthian columns, like from ancient Greece and Rome, that evoke the past and are supposed to be classically beautiful. you have a transition towards more simplified forms that are more geometrically harmonious, as well as an emphasis on fewer subjects that are done really well. And you see this in music. Mozart's music is really about the beautiful melody and the harmony underneath it, which supports it. Things which are danceable, things which are singable, things which are memorable, versus the very dense Baroque music that came before it. So if you compare Bach to Mozart, Mozart listened to Bach. Mozart wrote fugues too, and he wrote some very complex music, but the emphasis of his music was on the single beautiful melody. This transitions into the Romantic, where it's again an emphasis on the artist and his expression. Rather than his skill, it's his expression of emotion. So the classical is about the beauty of the form. Classical beauty of form. Right? The conventions that support that beauty. It'd be very harmonious to think about the way a lot of people think about today about like objective beauty standards and things like that. That kind of thinking is very close, I think, to the ethos of the classical. Whereas the Romantic is about the personal. What do I feel? What am I trying to express? How deep is my sadness, and how am I going to communicate it to you? How is this a reflection of how I feel? When I draw the painting, I want you to feel the way I feel. It's expressing my emotion. It's expressing my story. Stories start to be grand romances. We have the development of the novel as a form, as a really popular form. It really begins in the 18th century, but it takes off in the 19th century, where you have big romances like Ivanhoe, and then, of course, everything by Charles Dickens. In sort of literary form, it becomes about the personal self-expression. In the German Romantic, you have things like Sorrows of Young Werther, right? You have Goethe. You have in the American world, it'd be something like Walden, maybe. But you still have the emergence of popular fiction in the mid 19th century, which is a really cool development. But it's very much about personal expression, really starting with late Beethoven on. The post-Romantic, we have a return to the grandiose in the post-Romantic. The Romantic goes from, say, salon performances to operas being really big. Operas were always there, but like what we think of as the post-Romantic style, something like Richard Wagner, maybe Strauss, right? I mean, even you could probably put Brahms in there too, but really people think of like Richard Wagner. Very grandiose, very much about using everything that's come before to produce the best possible art that expresses deep, kind of big concepts, big themes. At the end of the post-Romantic, you have a transition into a couple of different kinds of ethoses in literature and art, things like that. Art had become, and maybe in some people's views, kind of negated by photography. I don't really think so, but art had developed to a point where it could go in several different directions. The ethos that developed in the 20th century is about man. It's the concept of man. Man as the creator of his own destiny, man as the perfecter of himself, man as an agent capable of making new aesthetics for himself. So whereas the classical is about expressing things that are true, like naturally true, natural beauty, by the time we get to the modern period, the ethos is much more about creating new things. So in modern music, you have the development of 12-tone technique with Arnold Schoenberg, Anton Webern, even Igor Stravinsky would use it, but of course he goes through many different styles. You have atonalism, the idea like we're going to make new tonality. We're not going to use chords, and we're going to do it new. It's going to be new and new for people. You had Charles Ives doing weird stuff with like music for player pianos and fans and all kinds of crazy things in the early 20th century. The whole point was new aesthetics. And so in the art world, you get new aesthetics as well. Things like Cubism. You can look at some of the music of the the paintings of the Weimar Republic and get a sense of like, oh, there's a big shift in the modern style going on. We looked at some of it today. But the ethos was about, we're going to do things new. We're going to make new beauty. We're going to make new systems that define beauty in new ways, rather than searching for true beauty or expressing ourselves. Of course, you have styles that are kind of intermediary in there, like the Impressionist style exists in both art and music. Impressionist style is not about detail, but about the feeling of a scene or a space. And, I don't need to go too much into Impressionist stuff. Everybody knows Impressionist and Post-Impressionist things like Van Gogh, or Impressionist things like Monet. Maybe Impressionist music like Debussy. That's Impressionist music, or Erik Satie. That's kind of a local movement. It's very French, but it's very influential on a lot of things. So I just thought I'd mention it's kind of transitory. That's still a new aesthetic for a lot of people, but it's more about the impression of a space rather than sticking to rules. Thoroughly organized music, art. Impressionist art is not as thoroughly organized. It's not disorganized, but it's not adhering to any kind of formula for, you need an A section and a B section and a development section, just like you'd have in the classical period where everything was very set. The forms of pieces were very predictable in the late 18th century. What happens after the modern, right? Well, you just take it to the next step. That's the postmodern. Rather than making new aesthetic systems, we're going to challenge the idea of aesthetics in general. What is art? So there becomes a meta question with a lot of art, with John Cage and even something like Jackson Pollock, but more with like the actual avant-garde guys. What is music? What is art? This piece will be about. The art is the conversation we have about whether this piece is art. There's a meta layer to it. You might use 12-tone technique. There'd be fully serial music, which is like you use a math formula to determine what notes, and it comes out, and people listen to it, and it sounds awful. But the point is, the art was the system that made the music. That was the art. The art was the setup for the fish going over the staff that makes the music, right? That's the ethos of the postmodern. And like I said, it's very old, and it hasn't gone away out of academia, and it really needs to. But it gets a lot of attention. When you tape a banana to a wall and get someone to pay money for it, it gets a lot of attention. So people keep thinking that's what art is about. To me, that's very boring. There was other styles that emerged during that time. The 20th century, though, is really about this division between the academic and the commercial, because we have the corporate era. So corporate art is about making art for the folk, the art that people like. We're going to make genre books. We're going to make books that are like science fiction books, and we're going to put paintings on them that are realistic looking, at least. That's commercial art. We're going to make music, and we're going to press it onto discs and distribute it and play it over the radio for everybody to hear. And it's going to use the chords and the melodies that people are familiar with, rather than serial music. There was serial music still pressed on vinyl in the 20th century. They were fans of it, for sure. But compared to the people who like to buy Beatles vinyls or Elvis records, no comparison. So in the 20th century, it really started in the 19th, but the growth of the academic system allowed people to have a job and make money while producing art that no one liked to really listen to. So that's where we get a lot of our modern and postmodern stuff from. It's the university system, which gives people a position to teach art while they make art that people don't like. Whereas commercial artists have to work for their money, so they have to be able to have enough technique to make an image that people appreciate or is interesting enough for them to pick a book up off, right? Like, the point of a book cover is not to exist on its own, but for someone to pick the book up and buy the book, which a lot of people forget about. So yeah, you get this division between commercial art, and commercial art really bears its own discussions versus some of the stuff we've talked about before. But that's the ethos. That's my grand overview of the development of the ethos over years. And you can stretch that further back into the classical, into the late antiquity to full antiquity, and what is being done with those arts and what the ethos about those arts were. By the time with Constantine, you have an exaggerated set of features on the art. People said, well, that's a degradation from what came before. Not necessarily, in my opinion, but those sort of things happen. You see developments in iconography during the first millennium AD, where there's different emphases until we arrive at more or less a stylistic idea of how icons should be drawn that has stuck around for a long time. Wasn't as consistent in the first millennium. And in the West, of course, religious art continued to develop. All that stuff's interesting to look at. But yeah. Anyway, that's my overview of the changing ethos. What I think is that in each time period, a culture develops an idea about what art is, or what it should be directed towards, or the general feelings about artistic movements. And art finds different ways to express those ideas, whether it's the idea of like the personal emotions of the Romantic period, or the like evocative grand ideas of the post-Romantic, or it's about, you know, the high concept movies of the 80s. There's different ways that people express those ideas. A big idea that turns into a movie, that's a 1980s, 1990s thing. Anyway, yeah, we could go on forever about that, but I need to go. I'm out of time. So that's going to be it for today. I'm going to look at the chat before I go. I appreciate everybody hanging out with me and talking art stuff. James Gurney of Dinotopia fame has a recording on his channel of where he went cross-country with Thomas Kinkade in the early 80s. Interesting. He's a great painter, too. The low effort of stuff like Banana on the Wall makes it great for money laundering. Yeah. Very low effort. You know, the art is being able to convince people it's art. And I've seen it a million times in different things. Here's a towel on the wall. Can't a towel be art the way it folds? It's like, I think art needs intent. And I think the only intent is for you to make me have a conversation with you about the towel. That's the art, is the conversation we're having about art. That's old, okay? People did it 70 years ago. There's nothing new about that. People call it anti-art because it was a movement in New York in the 60s. It goes further back than that, I think, but I agree. Yeah. I think the roots of it are like pretty far back, actually, in the 20th century. I think you can find examples of like anti-art in like the 1920s. All right. Spengler considered change in art a part of the civilization's life cycle. I would agree with that. And I'm not sure if I would use it predictively, though. I don't think I would use it predictively. But I think it's really worth considering. I think any style or ethos, it goes through this process where things become stylized and then it starts to feed back, where eventually you get a breaking down of the style into something that is only understandable by the people who are already familiar with that style. Look at death metal, right? Death metal is hostile to people who are not already into heavy metal, and specifically death metal. It takes a lot to understand what death metal is about. Free jazz, same idea. Avant-garde jazz, it's hostile to outsiders. I'm not sure. I would have to think more about some of these bigger ideas and how that fits into it, because I don't think polyphonic Renaissance music, though it's very dense, was ever meant to be hostile to people. It was meant to glorify God. So maybe it wasn't for the people themselves, though. I don't know. I'd have to think more about it. I think there's some ideas that could be explored there for sure, that are interesting to think about. Music for the people versus music for other artists. Music for the people versus music for like hardcore fans. They're two different things. Same thing with visual art too, obviously. But my expertise tends to be in music, so that tends to be where I go to. A lot of people don't think as much about music. They're not taught about music history, so maybe I can fill in some of that gap as well. So thanks, guys. I'll see you all next time. Have a great day, and yeah, I'll be back on Friday. Friday's when the Fantasy Live Right is happening. So thanks so much. Let me link all my crud here. Patreon. If you join Patreon, you will get you'll get a new book. A deep cut called Farewell to Once and Future Kings for this month. You get access to the Discord. Same thing on Substack. I need to do a Substack post that gives people access to the Discord if they want it. Let me plug that in. I usually have one article a week and at least one video on the YouTube channel per week right now. So The latest one was on speed reading. Do you need to speed read? Probably not. Depends what you're reading for, what the purpose of the reading is. And then I'll link the music channel. I have some crazy ideas for the music channel. I don't know where it's going to go, but I haven't uploaded an improv in a while because I've just been way more focused on other things. I might record the pieces I did for my uncle's funeral, just because I practiced them. Maybe I could like perform them and put them up, and then there could be a recording of them that exists somewhere. So anyway, have a great one, folks, and I will see you all next time.